Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. We're looking at top 10 historical facts that aren't true. This comes to us from a channel called Top Tens, and this is an email suggestion from Bobby C. So thank you guys for the suggestions as always. Top 10 historical facts that aren't true. We'll see which of these I do end up knowing, and do I know from my American education system, or do I know from further research as I got older on my own? And then we'll see which ones I did not know. And was I lied to? Well, let's find out together, shall we? And tell me what you guys know and didn't know, or maybe learned from this video as well. Here we go.
You're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today, we're looking at the top 10 historical facts that aren't actually true.
Here we go.
Number 10. Columbus was the first European to discover America.
Okay, before he even starts, yes, this is actually wrong from what I discovered on my own. There were definitely other peoples that found America first. There's even been, Viking, I've heard of remains found in eastern Canada and the parts of the U.S. as well. But let me tell you, in my standard American education, yes, this is what they slapped. In early education, this was shown very early on, multiple times, that Columbus came over and discovered America, right? And of course, we still have what nowadays a somewhat controversial holiday called Columbus Day, because as we know, he wasn't particularly nice.
While this old belief has been largely expunged from the historical record today, at one point it was believed as a fact by generations of school children and is still maintained as true by some adults even today. Of course, the truth is that the Vikings preceded Columbus by centuries,
that's what I've heard,
and may have even built small villages in the New World hundreds of years before Columbus was born. Even if that weren't the case, however, from a purely technical perspective, Columbus never actually touched foot onto what is today the United States, spending all of his time in the East Indies. Number 9. People in Columbus's time thought that the world was flat.
Now, this one I don't think is obviously true. I don't remember learning this in school either,
Closely related to the belief that Columbus discovered America is the belief, again less prevalent today than it was half a century ago, that most people in his day believed the Earth was flat, and if Columbus sailed too far out, he would fall off its edge.
I guess I do remember hearing that somewhere.
That the Earth was flat had been refuted by the ancient Greeks, who were even able to calculate its circumference with astonishing precision, and so was not held to be a fact by any but the most primitive cultures at the
now that about the Greeks, I do remember learning even in school, and then of course on my own research further on. And that's very impressive, right, for the time. But at the same time, it's funny that way back then, right, this people like the Greeks at this time even found out with precision, right, the circumference of the Earth and different measurements and things about space. And it's kind of funny that people all the way fast forward nowadays, there are still some people that think the Earth is flat. Moving on.
Time. Number 8. Hitler seized power in Germany by force. Many people hold the
they were definitely a force and definitely feared. But I remember learning that he had a way with words that say, right, very weird person, but also could really rile up a crowd and really give a hell of a speech. That's what I remember hearing. Let's see what he says here.
Conception that the Nazis seized power in Germany, but nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that the Nazis came to power through free and fair elections, and even used the democratic process to secure that power. In effect, Adolf Hitler, appealing to the very legitimate grievances and fears of the German people, used the ballot box to achieve the powerful position of Chancellor, and then used that very same process to destroy democracy by having the legislature grant him the emergency powers he convinced them was necessary to restore order. Number 7.
Yeah, see, that's pretty fascinating, actually, right? That he, I guess legally worked his way into power there. Really, really wild to think about. And yeah, it is slightly different than the forceful takeover some people might believe, or maybe some Americans might believe. It is wild that he just could somehow convince this many people, right, of his plan, his beliefs, and get so many people on board with it. That was actually the scary part, right? That's fascinating, but pretty wicked as well.
The stock market crash of 1929 started the Great Depression.
Now, this is always what I've learned, and I'll be honest, because I'm being honest here. I don't know terribly a lot about this, so I might learn something here.
Of all the misconceptions surrounding that dark era in American history, the idea that the crash of October 1929 kicked off the Great Depression is the most obstinate. The fact is that the Great Depression was caused by a number of factors, each of which went into making it a deeper and more enduring economic downturn than it would have been otherwise. Instead of letting the market make its own corrections and wait it out, they passed legislation, such as the Smoot-Hawley Act, that raised tariffs on imports, which was designed to make it cheaper to buy American products. The problem is
I knew a little bit about that.
Anticipate that foreign governments would raise tariffs on American goods in response, thereby killing exports and forcing the mass closure of many factories.
Wow.
Bad government policies also caused many banks to...
Now, I'll admit I didn't really know the extent of that. I might have just grazed over that or barely heard about that, but that makes sense. That's actually very interesting, right? And would definitely cripple the American economy, that foreign response to that, right?
Wow. Wiping out the life savings of millions of Americans, which further exacerbated the problem. Number 6, Japan had to attack America if it wanted to survive economically. The belief that Japan was largely forced into attacking the United States because of the crippling embargo America had imposed upon it in response to its aggression in China is debatable. Japan had 2 options available to her other than attacking the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor.
Well, we'll see what he says. I might learn a little bit about this too. I don't know the extensive history of what came to be and why they attacked Pearl Harbor, but I do know that someone high up in military in Japan was against it. I remember hearing that because he said it was going to be a really, really bad idea. And then also, or basically like knowing they wouldn't win if they did it. Like it was a guaranteed fail like mission. I remember hearing something like that. And then also, I also remember that I'm actually fuzzy right now on the details, but I know they planned on attacking further, like other islands and places as well. So let's see what he says.
First, it could have negotiated an end to her 4-year-long war with China, which Japan was unwilling to do, or it could have simply seized the oil and mineral riches of the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, and the Malay Peninsula directly.
Yeah, if you see this chart, I've heard this even from my viewers. Big shout out to Australia and New Zealand. Big viewership from down there. And yes, they mentioned that Japan wanted to come all the way down to Darwin, which is northern Australia here. Obviously, they were going to work their way through the Philippines, Indonesia. So yeah, this is kind of what I've heard before, and this is better seeing it actually mapped out here.
Of the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, and the Malay Peninsula directly without involving America at all. Consider for a moment that if the US was unwilling to go to war in Europe to assist Great Britain in its struggle with Nazi Germany, what were the chances Congress could have been persuaded to take on the Japanese over the Dutch East Indies and Malaysia? Number 5. If Lee had won at Gettysburg, the South would have won the Civil War.
We'll see what he says about this as well. This one I remember learning early on, just basically too young enough to really comprehend war and strategies. I think I remember this being mentioned. But then in later education, I think when it was more broken down and more studied thoroughly, this was kind of debunked because they would have had a long road ahead of them, like one battle. Winning the whole war is kind of naive to think a little bit.
It is widely believed that the Union victory at Gettysburg in July of 1863 prevented the North from complete collapse, but a careful look at the overall strategic situation at the time demonstrates this to have been unlikely. First, even if Lee
Right.
had routed Meade's army at Gettysburg, it would have come at considerable cost,
Okay.
especially considering the number of Union troops Lee faced, over 90,000 compared to his
Wow.
own 70,000 men. This means that even
Oh,
if he
wow.
had been victorious, Lee would have emerged from the battle with a largely exhausted and depleted force
Yeah.
left with which to march on Washington almost 100 miles away. Additionally,
Oh, yeah, that would have been horrible. He would have had tons of casualties and supplies gone and just totally worn out. And like he said, exhausted. That would have not fared well after
almost
that.
100 miles away. Additionally,
Wow.
Gettysburg would have been only the first in a string of obstacles he would have had to overcome as he moved east.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, he would have to retreat back into Virginia in any case, and though he could add another Confederate victory to the long list of victories Lee had enjoyed up to that point in the war, the South simply couldn't match the North's almost unlimited industrial capability
Right.
and was doomed to eventually lose in any case.
Yeah, it was
Number
kinda
4,
inevitable.
Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves.
Now, this one, I might learn something here, at least on the details. This one, again, early on education, this was totally taught. I remember this. Just simply, the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. That's that. I do know that the 13th Amendment, right? 13th? I think it's the 13th Amendment. That was really the catalyst that freed the slaves. So I want to see what he says. I don't know exactly how these are related here, but I don't think it was as simple as the Emancipation Proclamation totally freed the slaves.
Most students grow up believing that the Emancipation Proclamation
That's what I was taught,
freed
yes.
the slaves, but it did no such thing. First of all, it only applied to slaves living within the Confederate States, and since the North had no
I didn't
power
know
to
that.
enforce the proclamation in those territories not under its direct control, it really had no immediate effect on freeing anyone. In fact, it didn't even free those slaves in the northern states, where slave ownership, while uncommon, was still legal. It was
Right.
only illegal to buy and sell slaves in the North, not own them. It would
Okay.
take the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865,
Yes, it was the
to do that,
13th.
and it
Okay.
applied throughout the country, not just parts of it. Number 3,
Okay.
Lindbergh
Yeah.
was
I guess I could say I sort of learned that in school later on, but it was a little hazy on the details, right? Or a little misleading with the whole Emancipation Proclamation somehow getting the credit for freeing the slaves when he just explained technically that wasn't really it. It was more a step to the final catalyst, which was the 13th Amendment. So yeah, that was kind of interesting.
person to fly across the Atlantic. While
This-
Lucky Lindsay won
This I've heard. I don't know anything about if that's wrong. This is what I believe because that's what I've learned in school, and that's it.
was the first
That's all I
person
know.
to fly across the Atlantic. While Lucky Lindsay won fame and fortune for his daring solo jaunt across the Atlantic in 1927,
Okay.
he was far from the first to cross the ocean by air. In fact,
Oh.
2 British pilots, Alcock and Brown, had made the crossing years earlier in a repurposed RAF bomber. They
Wow,
flew from St.
okay.
John's, Newfoundland to Galway, Ireland in just under 16 hours in 1919. That flight paved the
Wow.
way for commercial transatlantic
early.
aviation and made Lindbergh's future flight possible. Further, just a couple of weeks after the British duo had made their flight, the British airship R-34, with a couple of dozen crew and passengers on board, made
Those are freaky. Like they're cool, but they're weird, right? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. They're just like, and maybe it's just because of the style of the old photographs too. It's just they're bizarre to me, right? Especially considering they were, like over 100 years ago. They're almost super futuristic.
a double crossing, taking about 4 days to cross both ways. In fact, by the time Lindbergh made his world-famous crossing, close to 80 men had already made the epic journey.
Wow.
His, however, was done entirely solo, and clocking in at almost 34 hours of straight flying time was
Wow.
a far more challenging and grueling feat.
Okay.
Number 2,
So he deserves credit for sure. I mean, doing it solo, straight through, I mean, that's a crazy thing to accomplish, right? That is definitely risky and was spectacular. That's not a lie, right? But the fact that 80 men had done it before, now that's pretty wild. That's pretty wild, right? I definitely did not learn that. So that's refreshing. There you go. See, I learned something.
Custer's
That's
7th
good.
Cavalry was wiped out at Little Bighorn. While many assume that Custer's entire command was wiped out at the Battle of Little Bighorn
That's what
in
I learned.
June of 1876, the truth is that less than half of the 647 men under his command were killed in the famous battle. The reason for this was twofold. First, some of his men were assigned to drive and guard the lengthy wagon train that followed in the army's wake, and so were too far away at the time to be involved. And secondly, Custer had divided his command between himself and Major Reno in an effort to make a two-pronged attack. Reno's assault, which preceded Custer's by an hour or so, was driven off with heavy casualties, but most of it emerged from the battle intact. It was only those companies that rode with Custer, about 210 men in all, that were entirely wiped out.
Wow.
Number 1.
So yeah, I didn't know anything about that. That was all new to me. And let me just mention, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. This is fun for me because I am not a history buff. I'd like to think I know some basic, big parts of history, like everyone should know. But I would like, to sometime get into it more, just because I think it's somewhat important, right? To know different cultures' histories, different countries' histories, certainly world history. I'm always a proponent of that. Never just stick to just America as an American, right? Always learn about the whole world. Always see past your borders. So yeah, I'm not an expert on these. You might be able to tell by now. I knew a lot of these, but some of them I didn't know, and I'm glad I'm learning them. So I think that's always good to push the envelope and learn, especially for me, as I probably just don't know as much history as maybe I should, right? So this is a first step for me.
was chiefly responsible for defeating Germany in World War I and World War II.
So a couple points I do know about that. Did the USA play an important role? Of course they did. But you know what? It was a collaboration, right? It was a team effort. First of all, the USA in World War I and World War II were really late. They were really late to the game. And essentially, I like baseball references. That's my favorite sport. We were the closer. We did not pitch the whole game and do the brunt work, right? So, to think they didn't do anything is naive. Obviously, the USA played a really important part, but so did everyone else. I mean, hello, Anzacs. They did a lot of frontline, hard grunt work. And then, of course, the British, the French. There's probably more, but that's like what I know off the top of my head. They all played an important role. And it was not the U.S. just came in and kicked ass, like a lot of Americans might think. There are definitely Americans that think that, and you can't convince them otherwise. But no, it was definitely a team effort. We should not ever get all the credit like some Americans might think.
While American material and military support was imperative and likely ensured an eventual Allied victory, it was others who bore the brunt of the fighting against Germany in both wars. In World War I, the US was late to the show, not making it to France in significant numbers until late in 1917. It was the British and French who had been doing all of the fighting up until then, and had battered the Germans by the time the US entered the fray. In the Second World War, things were much the same, with American troops not arriving in theater until very late in the war. While they fought...
Yeah, and let me say, in school, from what I remember, they didn't lie about that. Like, they mentioned that we were pretty late to both wars, but I'll just tell you how the school mentioned it. Not how I think, but how the school system basically made it sound like it was also a team effort, but that we came in and cleaned house, kind of, right? The USA came in and finished the war. So that's just what the school perspective was,
largely
at least in my era.
In North Africa and Italy. By the time they landed in force in France in June 1944, the Germans were already reeling from the massive Soviet juggernaut that was rolling over them from the east. In fact, over 80% of all German casualties in World War II came on the Eastern Front. While it was the US that was chiefly responsible for defeating Japan in the Pacific, it was the Soviet Union that did most of the heavy lifting in Europe. I forgot
about them. Should have
known.
So
really, have you found that video?
So yeah, that was a good point, especially about the Soviet Union at the end versus Germany. So there you go. Please tell me down below which of these that you already knew, and maybe you were lied to about these historical facts as well. Definitely discuss that down below and tell me what you thought of the video, and maybe my input. If you have any problems with it, let me know. And if you learned something, I mean, I did, right? It's always good to learn. Please throw a thumbs up and a like on this video. It will help it out. I greatly appreciate it. Check the description out for this original video. It will be linked down there, as well as other ways you can interact with my channel. Also, subscribe. Join our amazing growing community. I really appreciate you guys. It's been growing really good lately, and it's just a great community on this channel. So my name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, guys. I'll catch you later.